Welcome, everybody. This is a session of Chief Data Officers and the Quest for Visible Value. Will be led by Professor Tom Davenport. I am Anthony Algbin. I am one of the track producers here with Elena and Kevin, who will be up here at the front. Elena will be conducting the Q&A as we get further along in the session. And she will also be monitoring the online boards for questions as well. So both in room and that. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Tom Davenport. Tom is the President's Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College, a visiting professor at Oxford University's Syed Business School, a fellow of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, and a senior advisor to Deloitte's AI practice. He pioneered the concept of competing on analytics with his best-selling 2006 Harvard Business Review article and his 2007 book by the same name. In 2022, he will publish 3 books on AI, including Working with AI, MIT Press, and All In on AI, Harvard Business Review Press. He has published over 20 books and over 300 articles for Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, and many other publications. He writes columns for Forbes, MIT Sloan Management Review, and the Wall Street Journal. He's been named one of the world's top 25 consultants by Consulting Magazine, one of the top 3 business and technology analysts in the world by Optimize Magazine, one of the 100 most influential people in the IT industry by Ziff Davis magazines, and one of the world's top 50 business school professors by Fortune Magazine. He's also been a LinkedIn top voice for both the education and tech sectors. Please join me in welcoming Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, very happy to be here with you. Some of you I've met, the rest of you I hope I meet at some point during this very large gathering that we're gathered at for the next few days. So this is about chief data officers, this whole conference, and so that's my primary focus. And so for the last several years, I and some of my colleagues, Randy Bean amongst them sitting up in the front row, have been looking at this role and trying to figure out sort of how do we make it work? How do we make it successful? It is, of course, relatively new. Before I leave this title page, I love that alliterative phrase, visible value, maybe memorable. It's relatively recent job. I thought that Capital One named the first one in 2002, but Rich Wang often claims that no, he had the job for the U.S. Army before that. So I'll leave it to Rich to argue that one out. But Randy insisted that he'd be sitting in the front row, and I had to mention his survey early on. So the job is clearly growing rapidly, and in the survey that Randy does every year for New Vantage Partners / Wavestone, 85% most recently said they had a chief data officer. Now these are large companies almost exclusively, and so there still, I'm sure, are some companies that don't have one, but probably it won't take very long. I was talking at lunch with someone, Gary's not in here, I don't think. By the way, there are a couple of seats up front if you are bold enough to make your way up here. I was talking with someone at lunch who was saying, well, the issue is that the chief data officer is much newer than the chief information officer, and they're like the child and the parent-child relationship. But the child is starting to assert his or her independence, and that sometimes creates some tensions relative to these previous roles. Anyway, surveys in general suggest that there are a lot of uncertainties about the role, and I think Randy for years has asked the question of what's this job really about? Is it for new people coming in and creating innovation? Is it for a company long-term employee who's going to straighten things out, be the adult in the room, so to speak? And there's always a big split in that regard. Last year, the first survey that AWS has sponsored in this regard. I think the AWS contingent is sitting over here, including one of my former students, Priyanka Tiwari. We found that 62% said their role was poorly understood relative to other C-level jobs. And I think Randy's surveys basically found the same. Only 40% say it's well understood. So this is the complement finding. Only about a third have primary responsibility for data, and their companies think, well, who does have it? But in a way, it makes sense because data is a big thing, and it's not surprising that the responsibility for it would be kind of split or federated in some way. I've always been worried about the excessive numbers of chiefs that we have in this domain. And I won't go through all of them. We've added Chief Digital Officer. We don't even have CDO to ourselves. I wonder how many people come to this conference thinking they're going to hear about Chief Digital Officers. Now we have Chief AI Officers that are appearing, so further confusing the issue. So almost every time when I go into a company and I ask someone who's not in one of these functions, where do you go when you want to get something done related to data and technology? And they're pretty much confused about the whole thing. They're mystified as to where these jobs start and end. So that's a bit of a problem. And job tenure has been short. Randy and I and Josh King, somebody in the executive search field for this role, did an analysis a couple of years ago, and we concluded it's about 2.5 years on average, which is less than most C-level roles. The good news is that there's pretty high demand, so even if you lose your job, you can probably get another one quite quickly in the current environment anyway. Maybe a little less quickly than it was possible a few months ago. So the context is a little shaky, I would say, overall. And part of the reason I think it's shaky is it's been, at least in the early days, when chief data officers were primarily about data management, as I will argue that is changing pretty rapidly. But data management is a really tough area to show visible value. And I have been around for a while observing this domain. I remember I worked for a consulting firm that was very big on this idea of information engineering, and you'd come into a company or a large federal agency and you'd engineer their data in such a way that it would make it perfectly clear what data was where and so on. That never seemed to happen, by the way, as an outcome of these projects, and they would take years in many cases. And so this has always been challenging. Data management is never perfect, whatever you do to improve it. Many companies have accumulated substantial technical debt. It's probably, if we could measure it effectively, even more than the debt of the United States, which is in the several trillions now. So that's a bit of a problem that CDOs have to deal with. These large-scale initiatives that we'd like to take on to improve data, whether you call it replatforming or re-architecting or master data management, the kind of current version of information engineering, if you will, converting your warehouses to lakes and lake houses and cloud migration and so on. These are often expensive and take several years and sometimes fail altogether. So again, hard to show value with them. Last year in the AWS and MIT sponsored survey, the single most common activity that chief data officers said they were responsible for was data governance. And when I saw that, I said, oh no, please. I think it's becoming a more and more a consensus issue that data governance is A, a bad word for trying to get people to do the right things with data, and B, often unsuccessful. So that again makes for a challenging area to show value. We had a session yesterday with some CEOs here in the hotel, and not everybody seemed to agree that governance should be banned as a term, but there were a fair number of people who said that they would like it to be. When I interviewed a number of people last year for the AWS-sponsored survey, and one I thought put it pretty clearly. In fact, I interviewed him at the last year MIT CDOIQ conference. He said, CDO without analytics is a 2-year job. Because typically you're hired to straighten out some problems, and after 2 years you've either straightened out the problems and there's no need for you to be in the job anymore, or people realize you're not going to straighten out the problem and we need to get rid of you. I have been more personally of an analytics and AI person than I have been a data management person, and so I have argued strongly for including analytics, as I'll say in a second. So these are kind of the contextual factors around the job, and so now I'm going to talk about 8 ways to add value, several of which are for every CDO, and some are kind of contingent upon just how sophisticated your organization is. And I'll conclude with one that has historically been identified as a way to add value that I don't think is working so well anymore. So I think the number one way you can probably add value is to say, I'm in charge of analytics too, by the way, and to add A to your CDO initials. And people have said a number of reasons why this is a good idea. Some people say, well, it's great to have supply and demand for data in the same job. I think the primary value of having control of analytics and AI increasingly is that you can show value much more easily. People can see the value of pricing analytics. You can make more money with it, or you can see the value of a next best action recommendation engine because you can sell more to your customers that way. These offense-oriented activities, I think, are much more likely to measure the value and to have other people say, yeah, you know, that is a good thing that we have that role. Obviously, we can't just create insights and get value, and I think this is one of the challenging things for people who have the Chief Data and Analytics role is we really have to get action as well. I'm doing a little study now on process mining. How many of you are doing anything in the process mining space? So it's a growing number, but I'm working with one of the leading vendors in that space, and they are really saying, okay, process mining is great, it creates some insights on how your processes are performing, but what you really need to do is do something different with your processes if they're not performing very well. They tried to call it execution management. That never really took off. Now they just talk about insights to action. So we need to take those insights, make better decisions, get to better results. That, again, starts to involve tricky issues of human behavior. I think that a number of organizations thought in the early days that they needed to have world-class data scientists in this Chief Data and Analytics Officer role. I can remember I was talking with a company that was trying to hire, you know, the best data scientist in the world. This is a very large insurance company, and they actually went after an MIT professor. Maybe some of you know him. Andrew Lowe is his name. He's a very well-known, esteemed professor, and they said, oh, we've got to have somebody who can do the analytics him or herself. Well, that turned out to be nutty. This is a business role. It's not a highly technical role, and they ended up hiring somebody who was not a highly esteemed analytical genius. Turns out they fired him later on anyway, but I think now we realize you have to understand some of these math and statistics kinds of issues, but you don't have to be a huge expert in them. One very prominent CDAO, Bill Groves, some of you know him. He's been the CDAO at Walmart and Dun & Bradstreet and Honeywell, some of the biggest companies that we have, said, I'd never take a CDO job that doesn't include analytics, and I hear more and more CDOs saying that. Okay, so that I think is the single most important thing you can do, but there are lots of other ones. I'm a big fan of data products. You know, this is catching on because Coursera now has a course in data products. There's some terminological confusion about this. In fact, Randy and I wrote an article with a third co-author who was from Accenture, and he said, well, for us, data products, he had left Accenture, I think, at the time, but he said at Accenture, data products are just reusable data sets. But for a lot of other people, and certainly for me, data products are not only the data, but also the analytics or AI or whatever it takes to make sense of the data and get some value out of it. And these, I think, are catching on in the world. 38% in last year's survey with AWS said that they had adopted a data product orientation. Along with data product orientation, you need data product managers who are going to oversee the entire process of creating something of value for the organization or its customers involving data and analytics and AI. We have realized that data scientists can't do it all. They may still be, how many think the data scientist role is still or ever was the sexiest job of the 21st century? I wrote this article, by the way, so I'd like to see some more hands up. I actually confess that when I interviewed data scientists, this was back in 2013, I interviewed 35 of them or so. I picked a good co-author. He didn't write much of the article, but he ended up being the first chief data officer of the United States of America in the White House, so that was fortunate, DJ Patil. But I didn't think the job was all that sexy. I thought it should have been called data plumber in some cases because, you know, there was so much kind of mucking around with dirty data. But in any case, we know data scientists are mostly interested in creating models, and they don't necessarily want to muck around with data all the time. So we created data engineers, and we realized we have to kind of scale these models. So we created machine learning engineers, and of course, we have to work with IT to make these things integrate with our existing architecture. So it's data product managers that can make all that complex orchestration work in the same way that a software product manager corrals all the different people involved in creating a software product. They also work with these systems after they've already been implemented. Data scientists, of course, have long moved on to creating some new algorithms for the organization. But the data product managers can see, are people actually using this product, either your internal employees or your customers, and how can we revitalize it and make it more valuable over time and check to see if it's drifted or not, all those kinds of issues. And I think these people can also be we've always had this issue. I think I saw Tom Redmond come in. Did he stay in? No, he couldn't take it anymore, all the people. Anyway, he and I are talking on Thursday morning about these kind of intermediate roles between technical people and business people in data science related activities. And I'm going to argue, Tom, I think, is a little less sure of this, that data product management is the best intermediate kind of role. We've talked about translators of various types and so on. I just don't think that companies will hire translators just to translate. They need to do something else in addition. So anyway, I think this can add a lot of value, and I've written some, Randy and I have written some about what data product management can do for companies and CDOs. Measuring and documenting results. I think, if you're in a profession that is of uncertain value to the organization that's your employer, you probably want to measure and document the value that you're finding. And Diana Shieldhouse is taking a picture of this. I don't know why she's taking a picture, because she already does this. She was telling me earlier today. But it's a good idea, right, Diana? Even if you're pretty sure that you're being successful, it's good to have a little sort of file back there of here's all the value that we created for the organization. If you have a data products orientation, I think in a way that makes it easier, because that kind of says, okay, this is an important product for the organization. We're going to try to figure out how to make it valuable. As I say, it's hard to get a whole lot of documented ROI from just data and data management. AI and automation often point to the time saved. I'm doing some work now on citizen activities and citizen automation and so on. I run into all these companies and say, oh, we saved, I think AT&T told us, we saved 13 million minutes of our employees' time through automation, which is great, but a different CFO said, we can't eat minutes. We have to turn that into dollars and cents if we're going to really benefit as an organization. There are some companies I've encountered, I think Procter & Gamble was the first one that said, we're partnering with the CFO to kind of authenticate the savings and the value that we think we've created, which I think is a good idea if you can pull that off. And in the survey from last year, the AWS survey, 28% said they do measure the value of analytics and AI projects in detail. I think that should be higher. Okay, this is maybe a little bit obvious, but things in business are about relationships, and you really need to build relationships with business peers. I hear more and more CDOs say, I've stopped trying to persuade the doubters or the ignorant about the value of data and analytics. I kind of go where the demand is already. So concentrate on relationships with business stakeholders who already get the value, and eventually the others will come around. They can be the stakeholders for your key data products initiatives. Of course, if they say, I'm in charge of janitorial services and I think there's something great that we can do with analytics, you may want to say, do I want to have them as your partner? Not, if any of you are in the janitorial services business, I am not reflecting on your activity, but it needs to be something that other people will say, yeah, that's really critical to what we do. And those people, of course, can become the change agents for the rest of the organization. And when Randy and I and another co-author were writing about the short tenure of CDOs in Harvard Business Review, we used Guy Perry as an example at Procter & Gamble, who already, I think, had served more than 6 years in the job. And he said it's mostly because of those relationships I was able to build. Okay, so this is meant to be a low maturity kind of person there. And this is something that you do, I think, at the relatively low maturity levels for an organization in terms of its analytics and AI. So I first heard this from a good friend, Vipin Gopal, who was the new Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Eli Lilly. He's now at Walgreen Boots, or Boots Walgreen, I forget what the order is. Anyway, he said, before I even took the job, I interviewed with some senior executives around the company, and I said, who could be stakeholders for 2 or 3 highly strategic use cases and get them done successfully within the organization. I was talking about this with Diana this morning. So if your organization has already done thousands of successful or even hundreds of successful projects, you don't need to do this. But if you haven't, you may want to be very strategic about it, get that consensus ahead of time. Typically things that make money or things like pricing or supply chain optimization or customer next best action, pretty clear tie to economic value. Instead of doing the whole job of improving the organizational data environment, you try to facilitate those use cases. In our survey, 35% said that they were taking this sort of use case by use case approach. And as one CDO I interviewed said, my boss doesn't really believe in AI, so this is the most I could possibly do. And sadly, that's not terribly uncommon. So this is intended to be a high maturity individual. So the organizations that I have talked to that have been doing this for a while, the 84.51 Degrees organization at Kroger, for example, one of the more oddly named data science groups in business. If you don't know, that's the longitude of Cincinnati, where they are based. And it's longitude because they say, of course, we deal with longitudinal data much of the time. Anyway, I think Todd James, who's head of data science there, said if we're really going to have an impact in a company that's already bought into this, we've got to scale a few 2 or 3 point solutions nobody's going to make any kind of fuss about at all. And so, I think we've all heard this term. I don't know if there's any real serious analysis behind it, that 80% of data scientists' time is spent mucking around with data rather than providing value-added solutions. So we need to cut that down. And so the companies that are serious about that are starting to say, okay, I need to build reusable data sets and feature stores. And AT&T is a great example. I think they have 27,000 reusable features in their feature store. And then maybe, if you're in that situation, maybe there's enough organizational patience for large-scale re-architecting of your data platforms. But I wouldn't be entirely confident of that. You always want to make sure before you get to that kind of huge initiative. But make sure you demonstrate lots of value along the way, even with that. Okay, number 7. As I was suggesting, I think governance is an unfortunate term, and nobody likes to be governed. My kids didn't like to be governed. God knows if I would use the term governance in the context of my marriage, I would probably be divorced the next day. Of course, we need to have the right kinds of behaviors relative to data. There were several options discussed at this meeting yesterday. Some were saying data trust. I like the term enablement. Enablement to me says we're making it easy to do the right thing with data. And so I think it was at one of Randy's meetings that, who's the woman who was at American Express and she moved to Albertsons? Danielle Kropp was the first to say, we banned the G word. This is when she was at American Express. But governance is always going to be hard. It involves changing the behavior of people who do not report to you in any way, shape, or fashion. And so why should they pay attention to what you say? You are here, Gary. I mentioned you earlier. Anyway. The best approach, I think, as I say, is governance by design, where it's built into architectures and platforms, make it easy to do the right thing, and part of that is creating marketplaces and catalogs and reusable assets. I said, Gary, I meant Alex, so it's you. You don't have to look around for the right person. I was mixing you up with Gary Vaynerchuk, who's much more famous than either of us. So. And any needed guardrails are kind of built in as well. We don't have to sort of tell people what to do and smack their fingers if they do the wrong thing. So people don't like this, so let's move away from it. And then finally, I say this only for high maturity organizations. You should try to create a data-driven culture. Now, I think there are some exceptions. Diana was saying this morning, they've done a great job at moving the culture in a more data-driven direction with literacy programs and so on. But I think one of the more perennial findings of the New Vantage Partners survey, Randy, is that companies struggle with this issue. 21% said they had a data-driven culture last year, and the numbers are not going up. In fact, they're going down over time. So, and this is despite a lot of kind of literacy programs that have not been terribly effective. 69% in the survey said they spend substantial time on developing it, but over half say its absence holds them back. And in the New Vantage survey, I think what it's 80% in the last year, when asked what's holding you back from achieving the business value from your data initiatives, 80% said it was not hardware, not software, but rather wetware, humans, organizational change, process change, behavior change, culture change, and so on. Yet, I don't know, anybody here spend more on wetware than on hardware and software? Well, good for you. I don't mean just paying them in compensation. I mean in changing their behavior. Very few organizations, I think, do that. Most of the culture change efforts are pretty half-hearted attempts at data literacy. Somebody I interviewed, I won't say who it is, said, yeah, you know, we had one of those programs, you've probably seen them, where, you know, you have to complete it on your laptop or whatever by a certain time, or you get a call from the HR department. It's the same kinds of things that we have for DEI efforts and cybersecurity efforts and so on. And he said, we give out a little sticker for you to put onto your laptop once you've passed this program, saying, you know, I believe in data literacy, or I'm data literate, or whatever. Sorry, folks, that's not going to cut it. I think a lot of these programs need to be very segmented and multifaceted. So Vipin Gopal at Lilly had, I think, 4 or 5 different sub-programs that he was trying to do, some of which are more formulaic, some of which are involving programs aimed even at specific executives. Certainly, if you are in marketing, your needs for data and analytics and AI literacy and so on are going to be different if you're in finance or human resources, so they need to be segmented by function as well. You need to involve culture-oriented professionals. Here in Cambridge, we have a very outstanding institution called the Broad Institute. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. It was one of 2 organizations that first decoded the human genome, and it's done a lot of other things. It's a collaboration of Harvard and MIT. And last year, maybe a couple of years ago, the Eric Schmidt Foundation gave some of its hard-won Google dollars to the Broad Institute to connect biology and machine learning. Broad Institute is a biology-based organization, but it's, if you know anything about that, biology and machine learning and data and so on are getting increasingly intermingled. And so I said, you know, what are you going to do with this $250 million? And they said, well, you know, we're going to integrate those 2 areas, but we're a little bit worried because we have 2 different cultures. The biologists don't know anything about machine learning. The machine learning experts, computer scientists, don't know anything about biology. So how are we going to get these people together? And I said, well, have you considered hiring a cultural anthropologist to at least identify the problematic aspects of the culture before you try to integrate them, or some techniques? I said, by the way, the United States did this when we were facing all these warlords in Afghanistan. Not that things worked all that well in Afghanistan in the long run, but at least, we made some progress. And the chief data officer said, well, yeah, that's probably a good idea. He said to his colleague, let's hire an anthropology doctoral student and see what he or she can find out. And I said, hold it, you have some of the most preeminent biologists in the world, and you're going to hire a doctoral student to make this happen? So there are professionals who can make this work, and I think if we're going to make progress in culture, we have to have some metrics and some indicators of progress. So those are the 8 ways that I think generally can make for more visible value for incumbents of the CDO role. And let me address also one that we think should do this, but may not, actually. And I'm having a trouble advancing my slide. I don't know if is there anybody sitting at that table back there? Can you move? My clicker seems to be ineffective at the moment. Well, oh, there we go. Okay, back, there we go. Monetization. You think, well, clearly, dreams of big bags of money, that's the way we're going to make value with a CDO function. But I was beginning to be a bit suspicious of this. I had a friend who became the chief data and analytics officer of General Motors. And he said, the CEO on my first meeting with her said, we have a fantastic opportunity to monetize all of our driving data, all the data that we've accumulated through OnStar and so on, our autonomous, or our semi-autonomous and driver-oriented vehicle data. And so my friend, the new CDAO, started to look at this. And by the way, the CEO was looking for incremental value with a B after it. Billions of dollars of monetization. And my friend should have quit right then as soon as he found that out. But he sort of asked around, where did this idea come from within General Motors? And people said, oh yeah, there's a big McKinsey study saying that monetization was quite possible. And I don't know, somebody from McKinsey spoke this morning, so they must be a high-level sponsor. I don't see them on the list, so maybe, well, I'll talk about them anyway. Anyway, so my friend called the McKinsey people who were involved in the project. I used to work there, it's a fine organization, and said, where'd you get this idea that we could make billions of dollars through monetizing our vehicle data? And they said, we don't know, but it seemed like, terribly possible thing to do. But my friend started looking around, and it turns out people who are buying these cars and driving them around don't necessarily want to be told, you need to buy more insurance because your driving hasn't been terribly good, or you're about to drive by a Jack-in-the-Box. And my friend lives in Austin, so they have a lot of Jack-in-the-Boxes there. That was his example. And we'll give you 10% off your next hamburger if you pull right now into the Jack-in-the-Box store. People resent that now much more than they used to, and their general feeling is, if you're going to monetize the data, I'd like some of that monetization as a consumer. So I think maybe the day when we did that was a while ago. Most organizations never really succeeded at it. It's more difficult than people realize. In fact, GM has outsourced their attempts to monetize the vehicle data with some other automobile manufacturers. I think Ford is included, to a third party based in the UK that's going to try to do something with it. And even if you're successful, I suspect there are a lot of other people than the CDO or the CDAO function who would claim that success. We all know success has many parents, but failure is an orphan. And in our list of activities, when we asked CDOs, what do you spend your time on, monetization was the lowest of all the value creating initiatives that they named. So I think even if you're going to do this, I would not call it monetization. Clearly identifying value from data is important and maximizing value, but monetization seems to be problematic in a variety of ways. So I don't know. I wonder if we missed anything. These were the things that we asked in the survey last year to bring more value. As I said, I was somewhat sad to see data governance was on the top. Data product management was second, focused on a small set of key analytics or AI projects. Improve data infrastructure with each use case. Data literacy, publicize your group's successes within the company. That's always a good idea, I suppose. Detailed measurement of the value, create data analytics or AI councils. Reuse analytics or AI functionality across the organization is a good idea, but I think not too many companies do it yet. And monetization, as I said, was the lowest. So I don't know if we missed anything. Notice the subtle shift to audience participation mode there that I've just made very successfully, I hope. Is there something else that we could have asked about or that CDO should be thinking about to create more value? And Randy?
No, are you asking audience the questions?
Yes, that's why I said audience participation mode.
Okay,
yes.
Wonderful. Thank you
And
so much, Tom.
we have an audience member who's ready to participate right behind you.
Yes, no, I know. We're gonna get more questions. So let me propose a
Sorry.
little bit structure because we usually, let's do not forget, in the room we have about 100 people, but we have double of the size virtually.
Yeah.
Right? And what we did the previous session, we asked people in the room first. So I would propose we start from virtual people first.
Fine. Do you have anybody who wants to answer this question?
No, I wanted to ask you the questions people asking.
Oh, well, I'm asking the question first,
Oh, you're
okay?
asking.
And
Yeah,
then I'll get
sounds
to
good.
your questions.
Okay, wonderful.
So
Sounds great.
does anybody have a suggestion for this? You had one, I think, right?
Yeah.
I
Yes.
just, you touched upon change management, but change is never easy. Transformation is never easy. And one of the questions in the survey is about competing on data and analytics. And this year, 40% of respondents
In your
said that
survey.
they did in
Yes.
the New
Yes.
Vantage Wavestone
Yes.
survey. And I thought the 40% was pretty miserable, and you thought the 40% was great. So maybe you could comment on the challenges that legacy companies face in adopting data analytics and AI.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been interesting to me more than what the digital natives are doing. Some of you may know this guy, Paul Ballou. I know Randy knows him. He's been chief data officer at various places, Ford, Loblaws, and now the NFL. And when he was at Loblaws, I was interviewing him for a book on companies that are really aggressive with AI. And I said, why do you get involved with these legacy organizations? He said, that digital native stuff's too easy. There's no challenge to it. It's hard to change in any direction. Many senior executives don't really understand what this is about. Maybe they got a bad grade in statistics class in college or something. There have been some surveys asking people, do you know what a regression equation is? And a relatively small percentage say they do. I don't know. It could be just a generational thing. I think Max Planck once said that progress in physics proceeds through a series of funerals. So maybe we'll see that in these big companies as well as younger people who are more oriented to, and I can say this, I'm an old person, so that may be, introducing a new culture. But part of it is, I think, we discuss this, Randy, as we see every year. People say, I don't have a data-driven culture in my organization. I don't think the attempts to create one have really been that aggressive. And we thought, we'll build great technologies and that'll solve the problem. And it just never seems to. Yes, you have a suggestion about that?
Building of reusable data products.
Yeah, I mean, we do talk about data product management here, and we talk about reuse, but maybe if we phrased it in that way, we'd get more kinds of responses. But I do think that is a way to add value. And, surveys are always somewhat problematic. In Randy's survey, 40% say they are competing on analytics. I was happy about it because when I wrote the book Competing on Analytics, there were maybe 1%. But you never really know, are people exaggerating how much they do in that regard? Sure, Alex. Okay, sorry.
I have a
I'm
suggestion.
clearly not in control of the questions and answers.
Okay. My suggestion would be, do we have a clear view of what value we are looking for and the kind of data we need for that to provide this kind of value?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for most commercial organizations, we're looking for monetary-oriented value, but that's certainly not going to be true for all organizations. And even beyond that, I think you're right, are we looking for our customers to buy more from us than they do now, or are we looking to get more productivity from the business that we have, at least not growth without hiring a lot more people or whatever. I think it is good to be clear about that. Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to suggest, we talked about it briefly during lunch, figuring out the right external data sets to bring in to enhance insights. It's almost like the opposite of monetization. If I begged about how do you make money with the data you have, what data do you need that can enhance insights and analysis for your organization? And then we got to, if you like that one, we got to find one more because top 8's not going to do it. We got to have
Got to
top
be
10.
10. Got to be 10. Yeah, I do think that external data is becoming more and more a factor for many organizations. I think we were also talking about Peter Drucker over lunch, and I'm been around long enough to have spent some time with Pete. No, nobody really ever called him Pete. But I remember saying, Professor Drucker, what do you think is the problem with our current information systems? And he said, well, I'm trying to duplicate his Austrian accent. It's all internal. We only look at what's happening inside the organization, and we need to be much more external. So, and I think now we have the capability to do that more and more, and that would probably be a way to add more value.
Okay, I have a little suggestion to include in this slide. I think we are talking about data, artificial intelligence, and how we can put our data office in another level, right? So for doing this, I think it's quite important the people who is working with us. So it's another initiative. In fact, in my organization, we are doing this, trying to retain our best value is our people. So we need to maintain and retain in this period that is super demanding. These skills are super demanding. So we need to be sexy for our employees and also to be sexy for, well, to attract also talented people. So I think could be included here in a point just to be attractive for us.
Well, I agree with that because I'm working now on a new book about citizen development, citizen automation, low-code, no-code, citizen data science, et cetera. So I think enlisting a broader population in doing this kind of work is now increasingly possible with generative AI, which, okay, check, I did mention that during my presentation, so I'm off the hook. With generative AI, I think it's much easier. I don't know if any of you have played around with Code Interpreter. this thing that lets you analyze data without knowing much of anything about it. And we of course see that some in automated machine learning and some of the easier to use automation tools. So I think there's a real opportunity there. I do sense in general that chief data and analytics officers have been relatively conservative in most companies in that regard. This is a gentleman from Microsoft at our session yesterday who said that Microsoft is trying to do a lot of things in citizen development, and a fair number of organizations are. Citizen data science tends to be one of the more conservative domains, but automation and low code, no code maybe a little more so. I don't have to ask get too many more answers to this. If you want to, that's fine. Here, let me finish up. If you want more detail, that's the AWS study. What if you, Priyanka, if you just say AWS Chief Data Officer Study in Google, it'll come up, right? Yeah. And we wrote an article, Priyanka and Rich Wang and I, in Harvard Business Review about it. This is kind of related to what I'm talking about today. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay, thank you. I think to your question, I want to add one more, but
Okay,
turn the question back
great.
around to you. Just raising it up a level, looking at the organization as a whole. The use of data is a metric of success for the CDAO. And I would posit that the more and better use of data across the organization is a great measure by which to judge.
So how do you measure that exactly?
It's data fluency, not data literacy.
Yeah,
It's fluency is a term that's gotten a little bit of traction in the local CDAO community.
And would you do that by giving people a little test? You know, okay, here's a little data set. Do a logistic regression on it, and
No, are they using data on a day-to-day basis, using your data products? Are they paying more attention to reports? Are they doing things where the data didn't exist before? Or
you do this with a survey, it sounds like what you're saying. Huh?
you can automate the tracking through tools and systems.
Yeah, well, I do think it's certainly a good idea to observe. That's one of the things that people are doing in process mining. You can see, are people using the tools that they have? As more software companies get into software as a service, they can start to say, are people, I was talking with somebody from Alteryx recently, they said, we can tell whether people are really using these tools or not. So that's certainly a good idea. If you find out you have a problem, then you have to sort of start changing behavior, which is more challenging. Any other? You get any?
Yes, I'm getting quite a lot. So
You want to switch
we don't
back
have
to?
we don't have so much time left, and I would ask we can continue going with suggestions, or maybe we can pull some questions. What do you think? We have to make decision.
A decision about what?
About we can ask some questions, so we can continue with the list of what we're missing.
Oh no, I'm ready to move beyond the list.
Okay,
so, yeah,
sounds good. Let's move. Yes. Okay.
Can he ask one question while you find one online? I just don't want to be there a lot of dead time.
Sure, absolutely.
Clearly, we need two people
Yes,
handling
absolutely.
this job.
I just wondering if you could share your perspective on decentralization of data analytics or data science. I asked that question because, particularly in my team, our teams, you can get bottlenecked very quickly.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Good question. I always say that, every organizational structure contains the seeds of its own destruction. So what I saw with analytics, and I'm seeing it with AI too, is people generally start by centralizing because, they didn't have critical mass and people were not appreciated across the organization who did this, so you wanted to sort of get control of the talent in a sense. But if it worked well, there was a fairly quick move toward business people saying, hey, yeah, this analytics stuff is great, I like having that person assigned to my team from your group, but I would like it much more if he or she worked for me. Thank you very much. And so it moved, at least with more traditional analytics, toward relatively decentralized. I think in the best cases, there was still a sort of a link to some centralized group for nurturing talent. With AI now, the talent is generally considered to be more scarce, data science types, machine learning experts, and so that's centralized. I suspect over time it will be decentralized as well. That does make people more responsive to the business to address your issue, but on the other hand, it has its challenges. People develop multiple versions of the truth. They spend a lot of money on different vendors. They may feel neglected in their particular part of the business if they're the only person doing this kind of work. So then maybe you get a little swing back in the other direction.
Sorry, I don't have the microphone, but it goes back to slide 1. You're talking about a CDO.
I'm sorry, I don't remember that anymore.
A CDO does not want to take the CDO unless there's an A.
Yeah.
And then, of course, ties back to the 80% that you say, data handling effectively so that models can be produced.
Yeah, well, I think in general we want to enlist everybody in doing this kind of activity, and Tom Redmond and I wrote a piece with some other guys recently about this, but I think the organizational structure's always going to probably vary over time. As new technologies come in, you might centralize it and then spread it out. Anyway, got any good
So
online
actually,
questions?
the question I have, it's extension, and then got the highest vote. So extension of the question saying, if we see that CDO is now Chief Data and Analytics Officer, right? Is it a shortcut to forget about data management and just focus on shiny analytics and AI?
Well, yeah, I mean, analytics has been around for quite a while. I'm not sure how shiny it is anymore, but I suppose it's a shortcut to keeping your job for longer, so that may be worth taking that shortcut. I do think data management is important, but after, I think, more than 40 years of working with companies on data management, I have yet to find one that says, yep, data management, we solved that problem in our company. I would really advise you doing it piece by piece in order to show value along the way.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tom. Couple questions. I'm gonna put them together. It's still about Chief Information Officer. One question is, based on current observations, there are more and more roles actually reporting to Chief Information Officer, the CDO roles. And what about, how the CDO show value proposition beyond traditional CIO framework? So any perspective, this CIO, CDO battle?
Yeah, I don't know. I know we have some CDOs here. If you're a CDO, raise your hand if you report to the CIO. 1, 2, 3. Raise your hand if you report elsewhere in the organization.
Oh, good.
So I think we're moving away from that CIO reporting, but there are still some. I've seen some great, I think Randy hates the idea, but I've seen some great examples where people who are CDOs report into CIOs. The CIO has all of the technically related functions, and I talked to a guy at Merck Group in Germany last week who reports to the CIO. He said, it's great. He kind of looks out for me. He knows he can't do what I do. It works out fine. So in some ways, I think it has more to do with the personalities of the people involved than I do the organizational structure itself.
Okay, so another question I also put together. So can CDO achieve success without showing hard, measured monetary benefits? So I think it goes into monetization question. If you completely don't put this into agenda, can you be successful in long term?
I mean, maybe if you're in communist China or something. In capitalist organizations, we care about money, So I think, there are various ways to show value. Maybe you have much more satisfied customers. Maybe you have reduced cycle time dramatically for some key process. But I think ultimately, if you can't show any tie to economics, your job might be at risk.
And related question. So people feel, I think it's a question, a comment. So people feel that CDO position, if even it's in a C-suite, it's kind of like a junior in the room. So from your perspective, if we're gonna give this position a bigger role in C-suite, do you think this position can deliver more?
Yeah, well, I've seen some very effective ones, and I do think that over time, you know, chief information officers were the junior member of the C-suite early on. It takes a while, but there's no denying that you can provide a lot of value with not only better data management, but certainly analytics and AI. So I think we're in a data-oriented world now, and companies need more and more help. So I think they'll eventually be able to live up to the big office and the big paycheck and the, you know, flying on the private plane.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. So we up to time. So if there are additional questions, there is a break right now, 30 minutes break. So please come, ask your questions, interact with people. Thank you so much for attending the session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.